All right. Okay. The words of the day are not really complex words, but they're really interesting words. This C-E-P-H-A-L-I-D-I, which is interesting. I don't know what this declension is. The word is kaphelis. Kaphelis, as opposed to kaphela. You remember what kaphela was? The head, yeah. Well, it's translated head, but what it really means is the part of the body that sticks out that you can grasp. It's not,
The nose.
what's that? Not the nose. It's a wrestling term, and it's okay. You got to realize the Greeks, okay? Where did the Greeks think you thought?
Your gut?
Your heart, yeah. Everything came from the heart. They didn't have any clue. Look, nobody knew in Martin Luther's era. Did they know what the heart did, what the brain did, what the spleen and all these other parts of your body did? In Martin Luther's period, they had no clue what anything did in the brain, in the body. They were getting clues, but it was illegal. It was illegal until the 19th century to dissect human bodies. It was considered it's considered desecration. Well, one of the reasons that China may or may not ever achieve status. The problem with China, number one, China is a communist. You know China is a communist nation, right? So in communist nations, what do they get rid of? Number one, religion. You got to get rid of religion. That's the number one thing Marx said. Religion is the opiate of the masses. You got to get rid of it. But the problem in China and in Russia and any of those nations, what happened to the populace? They would not give up their religion, and the more you persecute it, the more you get. The biggest problem in China is China has this really big, deep thing with Taoism and Buddhism. And guess what the body is in Taoism and Buddhism? You're not allowed to do certain things. And one of the things you don't do in Taoism and Buddhism is you don't dissect dead bodies. It's a huge deal. We think, okay, so they're reincarnated, the bodies mean nothing, right? But what do they do in almost all those cultures? They burn them up, right? So there's a huge deal. In fact, the Muslims, what do the Muslims do? If the body is not burned by the first day, 24 hours, you got to bury it or burn it, right? Okay? No dissection. In almost every culture in the world, dissection is not allowed at all. So how much science are you going to get? You going to China for your heart surgery? Not a good idea. You should ask if the guy's been trained in Western medicine, because he might give you acupuncture. Here, I'm going to give you acupuncture for your anesthesia, and then I'm going to start chopping. And if you yell, it means, oh, we'll need to do more. We're going to put some more needles in you, right? It's like, this is really going to work. What a great idea. That's the reason that, by the way, you know, it's almost a blanket deal. You know why Asian medicine? Okay, number one, Asian medicine doesn't do double-blind placebos, so it can't meet modern medical criteria. So almost everything you get from there that has been developed, there's nothing developed in medicine in the East. Nothing. No countries. Because they can't do double-blind placebos, except in, I think, Korea, South Korea you can do it, and you can do it in Japan. But neither of those are known as medical powerhouses, right? Right? So the problem is that the medicines that come out of the East are, guess what? They're never tested. They're not human tested. And you know what? They don't care. Why?
They have a lot of humans.
They got a lot of people, number one, and number two, they don't really have medical care like you're thinking. And number three, if the medicines are not testable within a confidence interval, what does that mean? It's just placebo. So it doesn't matter. If you get rhino horn, it's not going to do anything for you. But the placebo effect is 20% of the effect. That's the effect of all medicines. Placebo is 20%. So guess what? Might as well. Is it immoral to sell something in that kind of culture that's not going to work at all? As a matter of fact, if I give you poison instead of medicine, well, that might be kind of immoral, right? But if you don't know, right? And then there's what's that thing where you give small amounts homeopathic medicine. Okay, homeopathic medicine does not work. Don't do it. Giving yourself small amounts of poison will not make you immune to other poisons, okay? It's just, eventually you're going to get to a point where you get a dosage that will kill you, okay? So homeopathy is not a good idea, just saying. Now you do get some resistance by homeopathic means. They actually do it for some asthmatic conditions. But I'm just saying, homeopathy as a philosophy, you know, it's just another one of these quack medicine things. I'm just saying, okay. So when we go back to,
Final.
yes sir.
Real quick, you were talking about no dissection. So what about the Egyptians and their embalming? That they would remove things. They didn't understand what things did, but they would do that.
Yes, they would carefully preserve them, right?
Not the brains though, right? They got rid of those.
Yes, they didn't have any idea what the brain did, right? As a matter, they had the same view as the Anglo-Saxons. The word snot comes to us from Anglo-Saxon. Snot means brains. The Anglo-Saxons believed that when snot was coming out of your nose, that was your brains.
I believe it.
Because it looks a little bit like brain matter. And, you know, and the Anglo-Saxons were really big time into chopping people's heads. Yes, sir.
Well, I think a while back I read someone was doing that. They said it was part of their brain coming out of their nose.
Yeah, it was. It was actually, some guy had a brain contusion, right?
I think a while back there was something about this one person had stuff coming out of their nose, and they found out it was part of their brain. So I don't know.
So, well,
That was just once.
but guess what happened? All right, where did medical information really begin? Do you remember?
Didn't, what you call it?
Robbed the
Da Vinci?
Da Vinci started robbing graveyards, but before that, we got a lot of our information from Alexandria. Because the Egyptians, they didn't do dissections per se, but they did remove people's organs, right, and preserve them for their embalming process. So the only place just about in the world that was a civilized place, other than where the Saxons were chopping people up for fun, was where you went, where in Alexandria, where they cut people's bodies up to look at the thing. The biggest problem they had, though, was the bodies had to remain intact, right?
Right.
But the organs not so much. But they did save the organs in, you know, in like, what do they call them? Yeah. C-A-N-O-P-H, canopic. Canopic, I think is the right word. Canopic boxes. What's that?
Jars.
Jars. Boxes. Well, okay. Jars and boxes. Okay. We haven't ever had that word, I don't think, as a word of the day, but jars and boxes. Pandora's, we say Pandora's box, but it's really in the Greek Pandora's jar. The reason is because boxes are not a late date invention, but people didn't make boxes that they carried around because it's really difficult. To make a box, you either have to have nails, no nails, or you have to be able to build the box like with a very, very careful edges, right? A lot easier to make jars. And the Greeks actually had jars that had keys to them. So they put a key on. You may find these, if you go to Greece and you look in some of the tourist sales stuff, you might see these jars. They're fancy jars with Greek stuff on them, but the tops are big, and they have like a locking mechanism on the top of them. They're really rare today, but they were really popular back in the Greek era, and that's all they had. So anyway, but back to the point. The head, we see the head as the center of the person's kind of mind and everything else, right? Because we understand the brain is thought and eyes and all these other things, right? But the Greeks saw the head almost as an impediment. The problem with the head is, what's the problem with the head?
Sticks out, you can cut it off.
It- yeah.
That's your target.
The kaphela in Greek means the thing that sticks out. And the problem with sticking out is because the Greeks are a Bida warlike culture. Just like our culture. We don't care to think about it, but we're all Anglo-Saxons or come generally from an Anglo-Saxon culture. And even the French and those guys and the Germans, Anglo-Saxon, French had Saxon roots to a degree, right? Even though they have the mix of the languages. But all these groups, and by the way, don't tell me the Italians are peace-loving. They're just Romans at heart, right? And the Spaniards, I'm just saying, all these are Bida cultures. They're all Bida cultures. They're all warlike cultures. They're not the cultures of the Jews. The Jews were a what kind of culture, you remember? A raiding. They're a raiding culture. They're a raiding and pillaging culture as opposed to a Bida culture. There's another culture that's a Bida culture that became a raiding and pillaging culture. Do you know what it was? Vikings. Yes, the Vikings. Viking means, I think, to raid, right? And their name was not Viking. But they became called the Vikings because they went Vikinging. So what's interesting is all of our cultures come from that kind of idea of warlikeness. But the thing about kaphelis as compared to kaphela, a kaphelis is the knob. It could be any knob, but specifically it's the knob that comes out of a scroll. Now you can have two knobs, but it's the head. You probably had, if they had beds in those days, the bed knobs would probably be kaphelis, right? But the biggest thing they had that was a head-shaped thing was in the scrolls. And so this word means, kaphelis means the knob on a scroll. So whenever you see this word in Greek, you automatically know they're talking about a scroll. So that's an interesting word. This has the H sound. Anytime you see the accented O is an H. So, hodos. Hodos is actually O-D-O-S, but it's that, so it's hodos. So this is H-O-L-O-K-A-U-T-O-M-A-T-A. And the most important part of it is holokatomea. Holokatomea. Now what does that mean? Holokatomea. Holo is a prefix that means all, or the whole. And katomea means to burn, or to, to kindle, to set on fire. To set on fire. So there are two words that are used, I can't remember the other word, that are used for Holocaust sacrifice, to define a Holocaust sacrifice. But the Holocaust sacrifice is a very peculiar sacrifice. In the Jewish system, I have the ascension sacrifice, I have the sin and guilt sacrifice, I have the priest sacrifice, and I have the thanksgiving sacrifice. This is a Holocaust sacrifice.
Are you pointing to ascension?
Ascension. Ascension is a Holocaust sacrifice. No sharing. These are partial Holocaust sacrifices. Some parts are shared, given to the priests, usually the hide. This is not a Holocaust sacrifice. It is, well, they do burn the top part. The top part, the oil on the top mixed with the grain. It's a lump of grain with oil on the top. And the oil soaks through, but before the oil soaks all the way through, you take the oil off the top and you burn it. This is not. And what's the primary sacrifice? Thanksgiving sacrifice. Remember, you brought 10% of your stuff. This isn't 10% of your stuff. This isn't 10% of your stuff. This isn't 10% of your stuff. This is 10% of your stuff. So which one's the big one? 10%, unless your stuff is nothing, you know, and then you're in real big problem. You got real big problems. But this is an interesting word because this means to set completely on fire, to consume with fire. So it's not just applied to sacrifice, but it is a sacred word, and you'll see it in the Greek. It's kind of interesting word. So we are in 3, and we just finished 3. What I'm going to do is remind you what 3 says. And let me remind you of this, too. So, I want to talk about something else before we get deep into that. Remember, before we were talking about the meta-epithumia. You know, the whole deal was the sacrifice and the connection with God. So you have Jesus as the sacrifice, the high priest, and God, right? And it's all together. But the thing I want to remark about that specifically is, okay, how many of you people have ever read a document from this period that talks about doctrine or theology at all? From like the 1st century. Like, let's say, I'll open it. Let's say from 300 BC to 200 AD. Any theological philosophy, well, I'm letting it out in the bag, right? What have you read that's theology of philosophy from that period? Nothing except, yeah, the Bible, right? Okay, so, and the Greeks. Now, if you study Greek, right, Socratic dialogues by Plato, the Aristotelian dialogues, Zeno, you know, all the Greek documents, guess what they're all about? They're all about religion. They're all about theology. Because what's the question? What is the question?
Where do we come from?
He survives the gods.
Well, yeah. Where do we come from?
And where are we going?
Life after death.
Where we come from is the question. You know, so basically, in the answer, you know, the question the Greeks had, remember I told you, the Greeks' problem was who created, right? Who created? Because in their theological system, there's no God creating. There's no God creating. God is, right? God is created within the cosmos. So there's a problem for Greek ideology or Greek theology. But the Greeks, almost all their documents, whether you like it or not, they're not philosophy. They're all theology. Because until Immanuel Kant, until Kant proved, you know, this is why you don't hear about this anymore. Because Immanuel Kant proved that there must be a God. Period. Philosophically, he's proved it. No one has disproved Kant yet. If you do, you'll win a prize. Actually, they'll probably forget you. But the big deal is if you did that, you would revive philosophy. Philosophy is dead today. You don't hear about it much, right? You don't hear about modern philosophers, this, that, because they don't exist. Since Kant, the only philosophy that came was that French guy who was a real nuthead, who basically gave us the idea that he basically tried to he tried to undo Kant. And the only way you can undo Kant is to believe that existentially human beings are basically God. That's the only way to undo Kant. But it doesn't work. The minute you go into existentialism and you begin to assume there is a God or humans could be God, then it gets deep. My point is this. All the documents by the Greeks from this period are about theology. Few of them are directly religious. Pythagoras, and I think there is a couple of Pythagorean documents. I don't remember them very well. But Pythagoras, remember, all of these groups created mysterions, right? All of them. They may have not have done it, but their followers did. So there's the Pythagorean mysterion. There's the Osirian mysterion. There are the Oedipus mysterion. There's the Mithrin mysterion. There are Mysterions like crazy all over the place, and then all of a sudden there is the Christian Mysterion. How many theological and philosophical documents do you think exist defining the Mysterion of any of these Greek deities, or any of these deities? Zero. That is correct. There are zero. So what we get, and this is why Hebrews, I think, this is a freebie, but this is why Hebrews is, and all the New Testament documents are so important. What are they? What are all those letters?
Theology, religion.
They are all, well, some of them are just telling us what was happening or what to, doing, but you're precisely right. Especially Hebrews. In Hebrews, we have a distinct logos to telos. I think this is the one that Tammy said I shouldn't use. I use the logos to telos. We have a distinct logos to telos of the Christian ideology, the Christian worldview, theology from this period, right? Our doctrine, the doctrine of Christianity to a huge degree. This is really important, especially comparative. So, all these, all the professors or professorettes in universities, and they say to you, well, the Bible's just made up, right? Well, I have a treatise, a theological, philosophical treatise in Hebrews that is an amazing Greek document. You haven't noticed how amazing the Greek document is? That basically tries to prove to you the whole point of the Christian ideology, ideas, right? And how effective was it? It's very effective. Yeah. Matter of fact, it was so effective. What happened? Well, you guys walk down the street and you find there's a church, a Kurios, right? There's a Kurios to Mithras right down the street. There's a Kurios to Oedipus right here down the street, right? There's a Kurios to Pythagoras right down the street. The Epicureans have their little temple over here too, right? No. Christianity defined it enough that Western civilization said, no, does this make sense? It makes total sense. And by the way, anybody read any theological, philosophical documents from Islam, Hindu, Buddhism? I challenge you. Go look for them. Go see if you can find them. The best you get, the Bhagavad Gita's, the Gitas in Hinduism, they're not philosophical, theological texts. They're not trying to prove anything. They're about gods. They're about gods who are interacting with humans, and they're not very happy, nice, or good. Muhammad didn't give you any philosophy. He just said, hey, this is it. Do this. And it's so rational, isn't it? It really fits. It really helps the world. I'm just saying that when you go look back at quote, religious documents, Christianity is not a religion. But anyway, with that in mind, we are moving from the sacrifice to the purpose of law. The purpose of law. So, the law, and I'm going to very quickly, in the NIV, the law is only a shadow of good things that are coming, not the realities themselves. For this reason, it can never, by the same sacrifice repeated endlessly, make perfect those who draw near to worship. That was one. Two, if it could, would they not have stopped being offered? For the worships would have been cleansed once for all and would no longer have felt guilty. And then three we had, but those sacrifices are an annual reminder of sins. And I want to key on that because our impression, this is what I went back to. Our impression of the law is what? What's that?
Ten Commandments.
Yeah, but what is it today to us?
Civil.
Well, that's a good point. Church law and God's law. Oh, God forbid anybody follow God's law. Right? I mean, if we put murderers to death, what a horrible thing. If we put child molesters to death or rapists to death, what a horrible thing. If we got rid of pornography and pornographers, what a horrible thing. If we got rid of lottery and gambling because it's immoral, what a horrible thing. That would be God's law. Don't follow God's law. If you follow God's law, you might go down some horrible path of righteousness. It'd be terrible, right? A horrible world. Look, we in the church have really mistreated God's law, and we almost act like it doesn't exist. Right? That is not the message of Hebrews. In fact, I would say it's not the message of the New Testament or the Old Testament. The biggest problem we have is we want to say law, gospel. Law, gospel. Right? When God says law and gospel, Hebrews says, look, the law is what made salvation possible. And now, in these verses, it reiterates. The law and the sacrifices, basically, the sacrifices determined by law were not effective, right? Until what? Until Jesus Christ. That was the whole point of all of 9 and some of the previous things we had about the sacrifice of Christ being the meta-epithumia. But now Hebrews is telling us the importance of law is it's an annual reminder of sins. But there's more to it. And it'll be interesting what they say. I'll give you the literal translations. These actions are themselves a recollection of missed the mark through each year. And I told you before, when we talk about missed the mark, we have missed the mark. All will miss the mark, right? But that doesn't mean you don't aim for it, right? There is also the law, or I'm going to call it antinomos. Antinomos is I broke the law. Is break the law different than miss the mark? Well, I'll talk about that in a second. And the third one is cleanliness. Cleanliness. Okay, cleanliness. So, okay, God's purpose and will for your life is you're supposed to be a Billy Graham. Or God's purpose and will for your life is you're supposed to be an engineer. Or God's purpose and will for your life is you're supposed to be a mother that brings up wonderful children, or a father that brings up wonderful children. And let's say you don't make the mark. Is that the same as sin? Well, in our minds, this is harmantia, or miss the mark, is the word that's used over and over again to include miss the mark. To the Greeks, this is a very obvious thing. Antinomos is I broke the law. Remember Jesus said, well, that was an interesting thing, but Jesus told people who tried to keep the law from their youth, right? And if you go to the catechism, it's going to be hard to keep any of the law. But if you go back to the actual words in the Old Testament, could you possibly keep the law from your youth? Did you really go back to the words in the Old Testament?
No.
I'm not sure about that. We have made the law an interesting thing. There's an assumption that you, no kidding, could be antinomos. The problem isn't that. The problem to the New Testament is not that you broke the law. It's that you missed the mark. Like, for example, let's say I'm a wealthy Jewish Plutarch, and I've not broken a single commandment like the rich young ruler. Right? Now, he did break one, the covenant, he coveted. But that, for some reason, we missed that, even though it says right in the Bible, and they don't list covet, and then Jesus said, one you left out, and it's obvious that he was coveting, right? But let's say you're a Jewish person, and God intended for you to be a great prophet in Jerusalem. And instead, you sat in your house and ate olives and grapes and drank wine. You didn't break any laws, but did you miss the mark? The New Testament calls for us to not miss the mark. It's a totally different view than the Old Testament view, although I don't think they're different. I think when God gave us the law, he wanted us to do what? hit the mark, right? He wanted us to hit the mark. He thought the law, well, he didn't think. He knew what would happen. But he thought by giving us a bar that we would basically go for the bar, right? But the bar isn't that you don't break the law. The bar is that you achieve in God's world, right? Achieve what? Look at the Jewish people. It worked for them. How many Nobel Prizes come out of the Jewish community? Huge, more than any other group in the world. They have the most Nobel Prizes, they have the most Nobel almost everything, especially until they start getting racist and anti-Semitic in Sweden. But the big deal is that that did work in a large measure for that culture and those people. And it worked to a degree for our culture and our people, although our culture and our people kind of are more of a Greek view, right? Our Greek view is, well, we call it what? The Protestant work ethic. It's not really the Protestant work ethic. It's really the Western civilization work ethic. But that work ethic drives us to try to hit the mark. It's just that God says the bar is antinomos, don't break the law. There's also cleanliness, and we associate that too. What God has done, he hasn't moved the bar. He's just reinvigorated the view. And the view basically is for, remember I told you, look who we're writing to. Remember, this looks like it's written to the Jews, the Hebrews. But it's kind of obvious that it's going to the Greeks, and to the Romans, and to the Jews, to the Hebrews, and to probably the Egyptians, and whoever else you want. You can add yourself in that pile, right? So let's look at 4. This is pretty easy in the Hebrew. I'll read the NIV. Because it's impossible for the blood of bulls and goats to take away sins. But look back at 3. Remember 3. These actions are themselves a recollection of missed the mark through each year. So there is a purpose in the sacrifice. It's not, as a matter of fact, what do we know they were doing until Jerusalem fell? What were the Christians doing?
Oh, they were going to the temple.
They were going to the temple, and what's the only thing you do in the temple? Sacrifice. People get this wrong. They think, oh, we go pray in the temple, we go read this. No. If you want to pray, you go to synagogue. If you want to study the scriptures, you go to synagogue. But when you want to sacrifice, there is only one place to sacrifice. The Christians were going to the temple to do the Thanksgiving sacrifice. Until John Chrysostom, we were really hanging in the wind. John Chrysostom in Antioch in about 300 AD, a little bit before that, created our Eucharistic liturgy. And the Eucharistic liturgy bound basically all the Christians in doing our Eucharist. We do the Eucharist very similarly, although we don't do a 4-hour service like they do. But it is impossible for the blood of bulls and goats to take away sins. But those sacrifices are an annual reminder of sin, of missed mark. So, and I'm not telling you anything new here, one of the purposes of the Eucharist is to remind you of your sin. To remind you of your sin. To remind you of the fact that you have to be reunited with Christ. This is a little theological, but this is right out of Hebrew concept. 4, gar, signing of resistance 4. It is added, not possible, adunatos. It is impossible that the blood, that is added. Blood, hamia, of is added, implied. Bulls, taros, bullock, and added, the kai, of is added, goats, trigos. Should take away, literally, aferio, remove the sins. Literally, remove, miss the mark. As a matter of fact, I'll go even further. If miss the mark is missed opportunity, if miss the mark is missed opportunity, it is impossible for anything to remove miss the mark. Now the blood of Christ will cover it, right? But it won't correct it. The same is true of this. I go over to antinomos. What did Jesus say that you're supposed to do on the day of, it's like the last day of the year, Yom Kippur? What are you supposed to do? To gain your repentance. I am required, if I sin against you in Jewish culture, I'm required to go to you personally and ask your forgiveness and recompense you if I cheated you. If I cheated you, I sold your car at a bus, I'm supposed to recompense you for what I did.
The New Testament says the same thing before the Eucharist. You're supposed to go, and if you've sinned against anyone, ask their forgiveness before Eucharist.
Bingo. As a matter of fact, what do? We confess, right? We confess before Eucharist. I think it's really interesting, though, that the sacrifice, and it's specific in the Greek, is to remind us of miss the mark. So I'll put it in a very simple term. I mean, I think grandiose terms are more important, literally. I mean, I don't think God is going to be upset with us too much. So I missed an opportunity to talk to my neighbor about Jesus. Or I missed an opportunity to talk to my neighbor about something in their life to help them, right? That I could have helped them with. That is a message in Hebrews, right? Remember Hebrews at the beginning? Talk to your neighbors, talk to the people, explain to them things, right? So I don't think God and Jesus, I don't think there are some Jews that say, okay, so you missed an opportunity, God's going to mark that. That's a bad mark. I don't think that's the big thing, although that is part of Harmantia, miss the mark, right? When you watch a show or listen to something you really shouldn't be watching or listening to, that may be a miss the mark, but I don't think God's going to be like beating you over the head with that. What he's going to say is, well, I sent you in the world to do this. And what'd you do? You know, I sent you in the world to be a scholar or whatever, and you became a criminal. Or you became a ne'er-do-well. Or you didn't achieve the purpose that you could have. You didn't try to achieve the purpose, right? And I don't think God will say, I think God gives extra points. You know, people say, when I was teaching kids all the time, the kids would go, well, how do I know what God's will is? And I said, well, what do you like? I mean, not the purulent things. I mean, the really good things. You know, what do you want to do? God didn't go to David and say, hey, David, I know you hate to write poetry, but I want you to write the Psalms for me, right? David loved to write poetry. He wrote Psalms. So if you love to write, I tell them, if you love to do that stuff, then do something you love, right? Then it's not work. So I think that God, when he says, you know, he gives us desires, and as we work in life, we try to achieve those good desires. That is aiming for the mark. It's when the people that, you know, I know Tammy works with a lot of these people, but, you know, people come into her all the time in the clinics and stuff, and it's like, well, you know, this is how I've been living my life. And they're not doing anything with their life. That's the saddest thing. You know, all of us have been trying to successfully achieve. So I'm talking to the choir, right? But for those who have not, and for us, you know, the message we can get is, well, you know, when I used to say I would always volunteer for almost anything. I've kind of backed off on that a little bit. But when I was in the military, I'd volunteer for almost anything they would offer to me. Why? Because I saw it as a good potential for learning and for doing. You know, I didn't want to miss the mark. So I said, if the bar was set for me, that makes it easy, right? But anyway, so let's look at the literal in 4. Assigning a reason is impossible for the blood of bullocks and of goats to remove miss the mark. Okay, that's pretty clear, right? You don't need anything added. So let's look at 5. Therefore, when Christ came into the world, he said, sacrifice and offering you did not desire, but a body you prepared for me. Now this is really interesting, because it says, when Christ came into the world, he said. We don't know where this quote specifically came from, because it's not directly out of the Gospels, but it is. We'll look at the specific Psalms. It's from Psalms. But very interesting. Let's parse it. Wherefore, it's literally dio, through which thing, when he cometh. I'm translating from the King James because it's easier. King James is more of a literal translation than NIV. Wherefore, through which thing, when he cometh, literally, yershomai, to enter, when he enters, into the world, the cosmos, the creation. I don't want to get rid of this. Here we'll have this. All right. Here's the plenum of everything and theos, right? The plenum of everything, theos. Here's the cosmos. And here is philosophia. And here is gay. It says, you know, in our, I wish we wouldn't dumb this down, because the more we dumb this down, the more we really screw up everything that I think Hebrews is trying to tell us. Therefore, through which thing, when he cometh, when he entered, not cometh, when he entered into the cosmos. Okay, what did I just call Jesus?
God.
He's God. Because God exists outside of the creation. So when Jesus entered the cosmos, not the philosophia, not the gay is world. It would have been the earth. But it doesn't say that. It says when he entered into the cosmos. So automatically we're saying that Jesus is big G God. He entered. He legoed. Not just said, he argued. Thusa and prosphoria. Thusa is sacrifice. Prosphoria is the presentation. It could be a presentation of a Doron, but it's the presentation of the Thusa. So we're not talking about Holocaust, we're talking about Thanksgiving. And we're also talking about Jesus as a sacrifice. So thou wouldst, it's literally, it's not thou wouldst, it's thalo. Here they took, okay, thou wouldst made it a, what's the word? We call it helping verbs, but that's not what they are. They're infinitive construction. I can't remember. Anyway, Jan would know. But in another language, we call them helping verbs. They took a verb, thalo, to determine and made it a helping verb. I don't know why they do that. Not, but de, a soma, the body, sartsuke and pneuma. Hast thou prepared, hast thou katarizo, to complete thoroughly to me, to moi, me. Here's the literal. Through which thing he entered into creation. He legoed, sacrifice and presentation of a Doron you determined, but not but a body you completed for me. And when we say soma, we mean sarx, suke, and pneuma. And this automatically says that what does God not have? God does not have a soma, and God does not have sarx, suke, and pneuma. Not the way we do. God is God. He is not anthropomorphic. He is not a human being that has a face. I think this is really important because philosophically, what do all the professors and professorettes, anti-God types, what do they say about religion and in general? What do people do?
We created God in our own image.
That's right. We create gods in our own image. And guess what the Greeks did? They, no kidding, created gods in their own image. Zeus was a philanderer. His wife, whatever her name was, his wife, Hera, I think it's Hera. Anyway, his wife was like cuckolded him all the time. They were humans that had godlike powers. What is this? What is this? This God, Theos, does not have a soma. Look, this is not lost on these people that are reading this. This is lost on us completely. Because in our mind, God is what? He's a happy gentleman with a big long beard that lives up, and you can't see his rear. No, you're not supposed to look at him, but something like that. It's not that you don't look at him. You can't look at God. Why can't you look at God? No, because you have a sarx sucam panoma and he doesn't. To see God, you have to be either looking at God's projection into our universe, into our three-dimensional universe, or you have to be outside of the cosmos. If you're outside the cosmos, you're inexistent. You're not just dead, you don't exist. Right? I mean, look, okay, people who read this like it's baby talk, like it's some kind of silliness, right? That some person wrote in the 70 AD, wrote, back in the 1st century, some silly person wrote this letter to the Hebrews, and it's all silliness about, sacrifice and a law and the Jewish things. Look, this is so deep and steeped in Greek philosophy and Western philosophy. Can you learn something from it? I'm learning stuff from it every time I look at it because it is such a deep philosophical book. This is not the Greek documents, the Greek philosophical documents are not filled with the depth of logos to tell us that these documents are filled with. I guarantee you. I've read them. I've read almost all of them. And they aren't. They just do not have the same rigor. There are some same assumptions. There's some similar assumptions that many times even philosophers miss. But the depth of this is amazing. And the average, what you need to be astounded is the average Greek reader or hearer knows this. And if they don't know it, matter of fact, the group that probably least knew it was whom? Huh? No, the women. The women. The women were generally not trained. I mean, they did not get training in this. So what did Paul tell the women, the wives, to do when they got home? Ask your husbands. He wasn't telling them to sit down and shut up. These were difficult concepts for the average person in this era. But the trained and educated people should have gotten all these ideas. They did not train women like they did men. And so they didn't, generally have access. Now, Xanthippe, Socrates' wife, did. We know that she read. We know that she was really pretty well educated. So what Paul and what Christianity was trying to do is what?
Educate women.
Educate men and women. Right? Because if you got educated men and women, what do you have? Remember what Paul said. We're all equal. Man, woman, slave, free. Guess who else they were educating? Children. And slaves too, right? Yeah, I'll give you children. I suspect, remember in those days they had the lyceums, they had the shola, and they had the lyceum, shola, and what's the other one? Gymnasium. They had the lyceum, shola, and gymnasium, where they trained people. Churches, generally, they were bought right by schlepions. Remember that? Remember they met in a schlepions a lot of times because they get persecuted, and that was the best place to go where the sick people were, and they were taking care of the sick. Guess what you find next to a lot of schlepions? Lyceums. As a matter of fact, remember in Corinthians when we studied it, they went to a lyceum where Paul taught to the people about Jesus. You can't make this stuff up. I mean, it all fits historically. It's all culturally. It's all amazing. It's so beautiful. You say, well, somebody made this up. I mean, this can't happen. This is all Deus Ex Machina. This is all magic happening, right? Oh, okay. Whatever. 5 again. Through this which thing he entered into the creation, he legoed. Sacrifice and presentation of a Duran you determined, but a body you completed thoroughly. Completed thoroughly for me. This is where, what's his name? The writer of God and Man. Not Aquinas. I think maybe it was Aquinas. Anyway, the guy who wrote the philosophical treatise in the Catholic Church that proved beyond a shadow of doubt that Jesus Christ had to be 100% man and 100% God. He didn't have to. It says it already, right? I guess you do get to prove it, philosophically or theologically. But anyway, it's proved it. Chapter 40. This is Psalm 40. Psalm 40. And don't have time, but I'm going to go ahead and read the whole thing because it's very short. It's like 17 verses. I waited patiently for the Lord. He turned to me and heard my cry. He lifted me out of the slimy pit, out of the mud and mire. He set my feet on a rock and gave me a firm place to stand. He put a new song in my mouth, a hymn of praise to our God. Many will see and fear and put their trust in the Lord. Blessed is the man who makes the Lord his trust, who does not look to the proud, to those who turn aside to false gods. Many, O Lord my God, are the wonders you have done, the things you planned for us. No one can recount to you. Were I to speak and tell of them, there would be too many to declare. And I want you to notice something. Almost all these quotes come where in the Psalms or in the chapters? Almost in the middle. Or they're not at the beginning, are they? And they're not usually at the end. In other words, I want to prove to you again that when we say rabbinic context, it means that when you see a quote, it's not just the quote, it's the whole. 6, sacrifice and offering you did not desire, but my ears you have pierced. Burnt offerings and sin offerings you did not require. Then I said, and this will be the next verses that we'll look at in Hebrews. Then I said, here I am, I have come. It is written about me in the scroll. I desire to do your will, O my God. Your law is within my heart. Your law is within my heart. I just solved the problem of antinomos. Depends on who you think this is written to. Is it written for us? Is it written just for Jesus? Just saying. I proclaim righteousness in the great assembly. I do not seal my lips, as you know, O Lord. I do not hide your righteousness in my heart. I speak of your faithfulness and salvation. I do not conceal your love and your truth from the great assembly. Do not withhold your mercy from me, O Lord. May your love and your truth always protect me. For troubles without number surround me. My sins have overtaken me, and I cannot see it. They are more than the hairs of my head, and my heart fails within me. Be pleased, O Lord, to save me, O Lord. Come quickly to help me. And the O Lord is Adonai, Adonai, Adonai. May all who seek to take my life be put to shame and confusion. May all who desire my ruin be turned back in disgrace. May those who say to me, aha, be appalled at their own shame. But may all who seek you rejoice and be glad in you. May those who love your salvation always say, the Lord, Lord Jehovah, be exalted. Yet I am poor and needy. May the Lord think of me. And it's small Lord, small L. You may help, and you are my help and my deliverer, O my God. Do not delay. I mean, you could dig deep into this psalm. But notice the first part of this in 5 says, through which thing he entered into the creation and he lego. In other words, these are supposed to be the words of Kurios, the words of Christ. Let's continue. I may have a little bit of time. 6, with burnt offerings and sin offerings you were not pleased. And that's the second part. What's interesting is looking at this in the Greek. In burnt offerings, literally, holokatoma. In holokatoma. This is really important because which offering was he not pleased with?
The ascension.
Yeah, the ascension and these others, right? It does not say that he was not pleased with all offerings in the Greek. Now, the Hebrew is more euphemistic. In other words, it doesn't cover this. Holy Son of Fire and sacrifices is added. The burnt offerings is there, but the sacrifices have been added by the translator. 4, literally, peri. It's not for, it's pierced. Pierced, missed the mark. Pierced, missed the mark. Thou hast had no pleasure. Literally, eudokeo. Here's the literal. You don't think well of holy set on fire and pierced, missed the mark. Pierced, missed the mark. I think this is very interesting. What could pierce, miss the mark be? Pierced, missed the mark. the Holocaust sacrifices includes the sin and guilt sacrifice. So remember, they don't work for intentional sin. So think about this. I committed a sin unintentionally. I went to the temple and I sacrificed in a Holocaust, a destruction, a fire, right? A full fire sacrifice. And what did that do for me? It took care of the requirement of antinomos. What did it not take care of?
Missed the mark.
Miss the mark. See? Miss the mark. That's what I was saying before. I could be sitting on my cushions in my house, not being antinomos all day long. But every day I'm missing the mark. Every day I'm not accomplishing. I think there's a lot more in this than, the simple, with burnt offerings and sin offerings you were not pleased. The Greek says, and this comes from the Septuagint, remember, the Greek says, you don't think well of holy set on fire and pierced missed the mark. Not through missed the mark, but pierced missed the mark. So anyway, I'm just saying, all right, as you think about Hebrews, as you read through Hebrews, continue to think of this. This is not your kid's document. This is not something you give to a kid, coated with plastic and they can slobber all over it. This is really deep philosophical stuff. You will not find this in almost any other religious document from this period. Again, I don't think Christianity is a religion anyway. I think it's historical fact. But as you look at Hebrews, think about this. This is a wholly developed theological argument, a logos to telos. And again, that's what we're looking at. So we'll continue with the law next time. Thank you, Father, for your word. We pray you look after us this week. In your name we pray. Amen.
Lionel?
Yes, sir.